Evolution.org episode 608 coming your way. Today we're going to do an updated 2024 GW-501516 Cardarine and Cancer Revisited episode. So this one is going to be really interesting, and let's jump right to it. Mobster and I were kind of talking about on the pre-show. Mobster's like, we can do like an hour and a half on this because there's
Easy.
so much to get to. So I'm just going to kind of read through some of these some of the reasons why. Let me just first say, because I was kind of thinking about this, and a lot of people think that, hey, I've got this big muscle, or I'm a meathead, or I can bench all this weight, so that makes me an expert on science and an expert on everything with nutrition and stuff. There's that mentality, and a
Absolutely.
lot of people also believe in that. Like, they'll see a big dude at the gym, and they'll go up to the big dude and be like, dude, help me out with my diet, help me out with this, help me out, what supplement should I take, blah blah blah. And literally the guy could tell them, I drink bull testicles every morning. And then the guy will literally, go home and Google, how can I buy bull testicle? He'll drive out to the farm to try to get bull testicles. It's just, that's how it is. That's the society we live in, especially in the bodybuilding industry. So what ends up happening is you get a lot of these bro science stuff, get talked about. And one of them is this one. It's
Yep.
Cardarine GW causes cancer. And they'll go off some misinformation or skewed information, which they misinterpret. And then it's the same thing like fasting. People will post a study, oh my God, fasting increases your blood pressure. Okay. Yes, when you are under stress, your blood pressure can go up while you're fasting. Your heart rate can go up while you're fasting. No shit. It's the same way when you weight train, or you go for a run and you sprint, your heart rate goes up too because your body's under stress, that your
Yep.
adrenaline is up. It's the same concept. Duh, that's what's supposed to happen. So we kind of, we tend to, as humans, we look at things more in a way in our brains. We interpret things and we think of things in a logical way, which don't translate to real life. And that's the kind of things that we tend to do in bodybuilding. So let's kind of get into this, Mobster. So let's talk about, first of all, arguments for cancer rodent studies. So one of the things is about, people will say, and I've talked to people, CrossFitters, people, and all this stuff, ran into them, and the subject of GW come out, and they literally come out and said, Steve, I want to use GW, but man, I don't want to get cancer. That's literally what comes up. And I'm like, ooh, who told you this? And they'll be like, oh, some guy told me this, or I read something online, or whatever. So let's talk about this. And the study was based on rodents who were subjected to GW during clinical trials. And that's partially true, yes. Um, but the thing is, this is what they're leaving out because they didn't read the study, or they're trying to be biased, or they're trying to scare you, or they're trying to do whatever. So the argument is because they're either repeating something they read online, or they realize, that if they cited the actual study, their argument would lose all validity. And it's kind of weird because a lot of these people, like on social, they'll make a video about GW causing cancer, and it's just like they're trying to get clickbait. That's their motivation. It's not
Yep.
that and then they'll say just 10 minutes of bullshit. They won't even look at the study. They won't even cite the study. And it's just like they're just trying to get clicks. And then that's how this shit spreads, because now they have 20,000 views on that video. Then another person sees, oh my God, they're getting a lot of views. I'm going to do the same type of video because I want to get views. And that's how it happens. So this is a typical example of using a study and bastardizing the study to their advantage. Jump in, Mobster, anytime you want. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Something that Steve and I discussed in the pre-show was a specific to the clickbait headline. Okay. So some years ago, we were hearing similar scare stories, if not about cancer specifically, with regards to creatine. And some of you may recall, and this is what Steve and I were talking about, the headline that went around the world, Steve, which was to do, I mean, bearing in mind, we don't really have that sort of sport or aspect to our athletics for kids in this country, but we still fucking heard about it. And that was especially in bodybuilding. We heard the headline, which was, I don't believe it was 3 young teenage wrestlers, school wrestlers, high school wrestlers, that were trying to make weight for wrestling. And this has been an issue in wrestling for years, where you got to get down your body weight to a certain weight class. Heck, there was even a fucking movie about it, which I've seen. And the story was thus: they had gone into a sauna in sauna suits, in the rubber, plastic, whatever fuck it is suits. and they were trying to sweat off the excess weight to make weight, and they died, which is horrible. Horrible for mums, the dads, horrible for the teens, rest of their family, friends, horrible even for the fucking coaches, and certainly horrible for the wrestling sport. When the investigation took place, and this became the headline, tubs of creatine was found, whether it was in one bag or all their bags and whatever else. So what was the fucking headline? Wrestlers that took creatine died. Yeah, they could have tripped over and hit their head on a fucking paving stone outside, but if you looked in their bag and you found creatine, wrestler trips over, dies because of creatine in his bag. No, that's the logic. And it's just that's as Steve says, it's clickbait headline. Problem with YouTube or social media is I can go on there and say my cock's 14 inches long and I can get 10,000 people liking the toss. I've still got 10,000 people looking at me talking shit. So the reality of the situation is we need to understand why the science is thus. And here's very quickly my explanation. And I've done this on another show recently. And then we're going to get into specifics of how the studies were done and why it's bollocks. Right. So pretty much everything, if even certain supplements that have had medical-like claims made against them, in this country, Stephen, never mind America, the governments are saying if you're going to make a medical-like claim, if you're going to say this rare Brazilian nut cures cancer, we need to see a study. And the supplement company that's made this claim doesn't have the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to do that. So they withdraw the claim, get fined if they're very lucky. And the issue here is thus: if you're going to take any product, and specifically GW here, and you want to introduce it as a pharmaceutical company to the market, you need to test it. You need to test it for the reason it was created. You also need to test it to see if there are any side effects. And at some point, you have to say, what's the lethal dose? If I take this amount, will I die? If I take the recommended amount, won't I die? And so on and so forth. If I take the recommended amount and I get the positives, are there any negatives? And so one of the things that they're testing for is to see if there's any carcinogenic property to GW. And the way that they've done that, which we're going to get into specifically, is they really, really pushed it as long as they possibly could. And once you understand how they pushed it and the way that they tested for it, you realize that although the science is there, and although it's understandable, as we're going to explain it, the reality of the situation is vastly different. I mean, the obvious example is, Steve, you've got more chance of getting struck by fucking lightning. And we know that happens. I got more chance of winning a lottery. And we know that happens. 14 million to 1 chance of me winning tonight. And we know that people win, but it just doesn't happen as often as we'd like. And certainly not to us. This is the kind of the statistics and the numbers that we're playing with when we talk about GW. Let's get into the science like you said.
All right, so let's take a look at the study. It's very important to kind of take a look at what's going on here. So it says the rats were subjected to ridiculous dosage, 10 milligram per kilogram of body, or to put that in perspective, we're talking about a 200-pound man, 90 kilograms, dosing around 900 milligrams of GW per day. So that's quite a lot, Mobster, considering the recommended dosage that we recommend is only 20 milligrams. So
yeah, let me jump in for a second here, Steve. Yeah. The lowest dose, and I've looked this up as well, because they went with a higher dose, they tested mice at different doses. The lowest dose was still the equivalent to 300 milligrams per day, 3 milligrams per kilogram for a 100-kilo person. So the numbers are vastly, that they were testing at, were vastly way as high as possible, different between what was an effective dose for that mice or us, and an effective dose and a lethal dose and a carcinogenic dose. And we have yet ever, never, in all the time that you and I have been doing these shows, and all the time that you and I have been involved in sport, and certainly in all the time that we've been aware of GW in any way, means, or form, not even people going up, as we say in the UK, taking a piss. We've never, ever, ever seen anybody suggest anything close to these dosages as being vaguely more effective than 20 milligrams. No one. There are people out there, like Steve said, that could do clickbait YouTube videos, and they have not done one that says you should take 300 milligrams or 900 milligrams. No one has. No one. So again, it's one of those, use the science, look at what was done, understand why they pushed it to that level, and then say, right, why has no one recommended that? Because we could talk about people being on 5 grams of testosterone and go, that's going to fuck you up. And yet we know people that do that. Why is no one saying to use 300 milligrams or 900 milligrams of GW? Because there's no fucking point. No one's done it. No one. So yeah, carry on, Steve.
All right, so let's take a look at what's going on here. So again, 20 milligrams a day, sometimes even 10 milligrams a day is what we recommend. We also recommend never exceeding 12 or 16 weeks. It is a drug. You have to respect any drug. Any drug, I don't care what it is. You never want to use any drug for longer than 3 or 4 months. It just doesn't make any sense. You've got to come off of it. If you're going to go, say, 12 weeks, come off of it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then you can go back on. But you never want to stay on it like for every day, year round. It's just not something that makes any sense because you never should use a drug like that. I've always told you guys that. Now we're talking about 900 milligrams of GW. That would be like taking 14,625 milligrams of aspirin per day. So usually 325 milligrams is one dose, one pill, Mobster. So if you take that much more aspirin, comparing 20 milligrams to 900 milligrams of Cardarine, if you compare that to aspirin, which is sold over the counter, you can walk into any drugstore or a gas station and you can buy aspirin, right? So if you were to take 14,625 milligrams of aspirin per day, could you imagine what would happen? I remember in school, a kid took half a bottle of aspirin and he was in the hospital like for 3 days. He came back after these. He said, "Oh, I took like half the bottle of aspirin. I was drunk or whatever." I don't know why he did it. I don't know if he was trying to kill himself or what. He claimed he was drunk. I don't know. But anyway, if you take 14,600 milligrams of aspirin, your liver would probably blow up. So you're going to die of something. If you take that much more of anything, I can go through a list of things that you would die from. You would die from, anything, Mobster, anything. You go to the drugstore and pull off any drug off the shelf and take 14,000 milligrams of it, and which is that much more in compared to the
You and I
dozen.
discussed in another show, Steve, that we went into a kitchen and looked under the sink. There's a bunch of chemicals under a sink right now that we clean the house with. That if we drink, we die. There are a bunch of over-the-counter medications and prescribed medications that are given to people around the world on a daily basis and recommended, and people know the names of these things, which will fuck you up. Right? Let me give you another one, Steve. For example, right? So the mice, again, in these studies, when Steve says about 16 weeks because it's a drug and come off, some of the mice were kept on all their lives. And the mice that they use in the study, and I refer to another article to get this information, they live a tiny bit over 2 years, Steve. So in other words, it's like me and you, 10. So if the mice lives over 2 years and they gave the mice or the mouse GW every fucking day of its life, and that's a solid 2 years, even if you and I just did 2 years. But to use the same sort of numbers and the same kind of logic, we would have to have this from birth and keep on taking it until we died, i.e. 10, 70, it's actually more than that now. And at some point we might get cancer because we've been taking it for 70 fucking years. See the logic, see the numbers, see the work it for yourself. You know what I mean? So it's again that kind of stuff. I mean, something else here, Steve, which I'll bring you back in for, is the flawed testing methods. Talk about that.
Yeah, let's move on to the flawed testing method. So certain studies support claim that GW causes cell proliferation in human cancer cell lines, and these were flawed from the beginning. Look, studies set out to prove an increased growth of cancer cells by estimating the number of cells using a method that tested for enzyme activity. Increased activity would indicate more cells. The issue with this testing method is that the very substance that they are testing with actually increases enzyme activity within cells. So you can tell by that judging cell proliferation by enzyme activity while introducing a substance that increases enzyme activity can give a skewed result in regards to an increase in cells. So even if no increase in cells occurred, I'll let you comment on this, Mobster, just in a second, but let me finish. The increased enzyme activity could lead one to believe it had. So in other words, it's like testing if your water is contaminated with bacteria by adding bacteria to it. So Mobster, you want to comment on that really quick?
I mean, this is how stupid this shit is. Would we, have you ever heard of anybody saying you should drink petrol or you should drink diesel or you should drink liquid nitrogen. No, because pretty much anyone with more than 4 brain cells that operate as an IQ of at least 30 plus would go, that's really fucked up, Steve. So then to like say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a substance to petrol or diesel or liquid nitrogen or whatever else, and I'm going to test if it gets fucked up by the diesel or the. It doesn't. You see what I mean? It's just kind of crazy. I can almost understand where they're deliberately using a chemical here that would, well, 100% it's gonna, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen because we're gonna use this chemical. But again, it's like, well, why are you using that versus human being? What is this chemical exist in any great quantity in a human being? And I'm going to say no, certainly not in the quantities that they were using. So it's kind of skewed. And again, I think maybe what they're trying to do is to force a reaction, force a response. One of the analogies that I used in a similar show that we did not that long ago when we talked about GW full stop, and we touched upon the cancer issue, was I said, how many things are carcinogenic? So I'll give you an example, Steve. Burnt toast, the actual black bits on burnt toast, or burnt pie, or anything that you fucking burn at a barbecue, and I mean burnt, charcoal. If you eat that shit, it's carcinogenic. Now, I want to eat a good steak from a barbecue, or a nice piece of toast off the grill, and so on and so forth, Steve. What I don't want to eat is the black bits. But I might like my toast really dark, but I don't want it black carbonized. So it's the carbonized shit that's going to be carcinogenic. Well, what most of us do is we scrape that fucking shit off. Well, what they're trying to do here is almost force a carcinogenic, a cancer-like reaction in order to say this is where that takes place. But again, so to use that analogy, every single chemical like GW, every single SARM, every single steroid that's ever been studied in the same way, in the same method, will have a point at which it might be toxic, will have a point at which it's carcinogenic. And in which case, we could have this conversation, X is carcinogenic, X might cause you cancer, about pretty much fucking anything, Steve. And that's a ridiculous thing to make. So like we talked about earlier on, that idea of it being a clickbait headline, it comes to the fore. We understand how the study's done. We understand why they needed to test it this particular way. We needed to find out if it was toxic at this dose, but not at this dose. We needed to find if it was safe and effective at this dose. And we needed to find out if it had any propensities for being carcinogenic. And when we looked at the study, we said it was a ridiculous amount that was being used to make that happen, a ridiculous length of time it is being used for to make that happen. And in this particular case, literally using a chemical to force that response in order to get a result. That's kind of fucked up. You almost want it to be in actual blood. You almost want it to be in actual cells donated by maybe one of the researchers themselves. You almost want it to be done in that particular way. But to use an enzyme that's going to literally force this reaction and response skews the result. And again, Steve, they're not stupid. What I mean is they will actually use this and other testing methods to come to their decision. They won't take this one in and of itself. But from a headline perspective, from the way that it's happening, if you just read this bit, you'd say, well, without understanding it's flawed, you say, well, it showed the activity, it showed a positive activity, it's more likely to be cancer. No, because it's flawed, because it's literally pushing to make that happen, to try to see at what point and what level and what time scale the response had. Onwards to the next one, Steve.
So let's talk about a little bit a scientific basis for the link of cancer. So reports claim GW increases carcinogenesis through a number of ways, increasing cell growth due to inhibition of apoptosis, which is cell death, promoting cell proliferation, cell growth by increasing COX2 and or vascular endothelial growth factor, which is VEGF. So these reports claim GW can lead to inhibition of the apoptosis in human colon cancer cell lines, stimulate proliferation of human liver, breast, and prostate cancer cell lines, increase COX2 expression in human liver cancer cells, and increase expression of VEGF in breast and colon cancer lines. So these links to the above mentioned flawed study done on rodents. So although some reports do provide an argument for cancer, there are many other findings that are inconsistent with the viewpoint. So GW as an anti-inflammatory in many cell types. I can go through the list: macrophages, cardiomyocytes, immune cells, myoblasts, hepatocytes, blah, 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 blah. Evidence also suggests that GW promotes the differentiation in intestinal epithelium, breast and colon cancer cell lines, trophoblasts, and primary keratinocytes. So this means it allows cells to become more specialized cells, maintaining a natural limitation of certain cell types. Without such a limitation, basic cells would run rampant, invading areas they typically do not belong. GW has been demonstrated of inhibiting cell growth in number of cells. And if you actually look up some of the studies and the trials they've done on GW over time, you would actually see that some of these trials actually shrunk the tumors. They actually realized that when they were actually doing the trials, they're like, wow, just GW stuff, this wasn't even our intention, but wow, this stuff is actually shrinking tumors. So it's not causing cancer, it's actually reversing it. So 4 different ways, and I'll bring you in, Mobster. GW is an anti-inflammatory in many cells. Number 2, GW limits cancers. 3, inhibits high cell growth. And 4, reduces cancer risks. So those are the arguments that were done against cancer. So that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I'll tell you what this is, Steve, and I've just read what you've read as well. Do you know what I think this is 2 things, and I would like actually to see the studies and the dose and etc. in these studies to really prove this view that I'm about to give. But here's what I think it is: we know that GW increases your ability, your cardiovascular ability specifically. In other words, you can run further, you can run the same distance and it feels easier, and so on and so forth. We've literally just before this show recorded one where we talked about the impact of tren on your cardio and how using GW at the same time as tren will actually improve your ability to cope with some of the side effects of tren. So I'll give you an example. What we're looking at here, I guarantee, because I think this is where this is coming from, that used at the right dose, i.e. the 20 milligrams, or even as low as 10 milligrams, like Steve says, because your cardiovascular ability is increased, you are fitter, you are running more, you are doing more cardio. And quote unquote, this is how fucking silly this stuff is sometimes, you are literally healthier. So because you are healthier, and this should also be the case when we're talking about the people that listen to this show, you are eating cleaner, you are training better. What does that mean? It means that your markers for health have improved, and that will include some of the markers for cancer. In other words, do unhealthy people get more cancer, worse cancer, whatever you want to call it, as crudely and as simple sounding as that might be, versus someone that's healthy? Yes, it's kind of fucking obvious. You're more likely to catch a cold if you're unfit. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So yeah. I was gonna just finish up and say, like, at the end of the day, the studies, we've seen there was a study they did in Australia where they took athletes. I think they took like 120 athletes, right? And they had them take GW for 6 months straight. And at the end of the 6 months, before and after, they tested, to see if they had any cancer cells evident. And these are all healthy. I think they were just males, but I could be wrong on that. Could have been like 80% male, 20% female. But at the end of the day, they were healthy. They were in their 20s and 30s. And they said, you know what? Before and after. Did you have cancer before? Did you have cancer after? And none of them showed any changes to cancer cells. So at the end of the day, there was another study that kind of wanted to see why there were inconsistencies with GW. And let me just read this, and then I'll let you comment, Mobster. So this study took 3 human colon cancer cell lines and 2 human liver cancer cell lines. They tested using different models. Model 1, in the presence of or lack of serum, and model 2, in the presence of or lack of GW, and studied them over culture period. The results were quantified using the culture method, which is the gold standard of counting to determine cell proliferation. Under the testing methods for the experiment, all 5 samples showed no changes in cell proliferation and failed to offer any evidence that PPAR, such as GW, increase cancer growth. So, I mean, really, at the end of the day, we're going back to the beginning, Mobster, and I'll let you comment on that. But we're going back to the beginning. Like, again, if you take any drug off the shelf and that's supposed to be at this many milligrams, and you multiply it by, what is it? We're talking 9. I'm going to do 900 divided, so 45 times the dose. if you are supposed to take, like, let's say I go to the drugstore and I grab Mucinex off the shelves. I have a cold, I have a
Anything,
lot of
man.
phlegm,
Yeah.
and I'm supposed to take one Mucinex every 24 hours, but I take 45 Mucinex every 24 hours, but not just one day. Every day I take
Of
45
your
Mucinex.
life, every day of your life.
What do you think is gonna happen, like, to you? Like, I think you would probably just dehydrate yourself to death if you do that. Because, like, even if you take one, a doctor will tell you you've got to hydrate when you take Mucinex because
Yeah,
you'll get
yeah.
dehydrated really fast on it. You'll start getting nauseous on it, whatever. So if you take 45 of them, you'll probably just dehydrate yourself to death. Any drug, I can go and get.
Ibuprofen, you call it Advil in America. Ibuprofen has an irritant effect on your stomach, even though ironically it's an anti-inflammatory and will reduce inflammation if you've got pain in your elbow, you've got a headache, whatever, and yet will irritate the fuck out. In other words, inflame your stomach linings. There are a bunch of other
Cough.
medications.
What about those cough medications?
Yeah,
You're supposed to take one. You're supposed to take one spoonful twice a day. Let's say you take 90 spoonfuls of that a day, every single day for
yeah,
the
yeah.
next month. What do you think is going to happen? Take 45
Oh,
of those.
man.
They would call the police to your house. The drugstore is going to be like, why is this person? You go to the drugstore and you buy the whole shelf of the concentrate. Like, what is this guy doing? Is he using this to make meth or something? Is he using this? So it's insane. So
Let me jump in at the end of here, Stephen. One of the even on another site, because I actually looked at I'm not going to name them, but I looked on another site where they were discussing the lowest, and I touched on this earlier in the show, the lowest amount that might cause an issue. And again, even that person said that the same, even with the lowest dose, that mouse was still on, or those mice were still on the whole of their fucking lives, right? So and he talks about specific this dose, etc., etc. So the comment that he made at the end was that he couldn't state that there was no cancer risk. But then we can't say that about anything, Steve. There was literally a medical condition where you drink too much water and you get so hydrated as to kill yourself. So I mean, you could do the same thing. You and I could literally deliberately hyperventilate and collapse. We would pass out. Deliberately over breathe too much. So you get to that particular point. I get why the testing is necessary, but it's almost to force the testing result is ridiculous. So the one comment that came towards the end of this other person's article, and we've obviously talked about this on shows where we talked about GW, etc., and the whole cancer risk, etc., and go, okay, right? Whenever it comes up on the forums, the easiest thing for us to do is say, please provide evidence to the effect. We don't even ask them to go back and talk to their buddy. We don't ask them to refer to studies or whatever else. And even fucking clickbait headlines haven't had this happen yet. Please provide evidence of one single person that you know or have read about, or your mate told you about, or was in a fucking study of one person, one, dying because of Cardarine, dying because they took GW at the recommended dose. And to be arguable, Steve, even at more than recommended dose, because even if you just did the first, please provide me with one person who's died because of GW, that hasn't happened. If there was a fucking clickbait headline and it said, John dies of GW, and you go, oh, but John was using 400 milligrams a day, he's a fucking idiot. We haven't seen that. We haven't got one example of the first, never mind the second. Not one. And what we're talking about here now, Steve, 10, 15 years? Now, there are always going to be, this is how stupid sometimes this stuff is. If people take GW for long enough, and enough people take GW for long enough, there will be at some point someone that gets cancer. Yeah. Okay, Steve. So let me give you a statistic that blows people's minds. Okay. So years ago, I went to Trafalgar Square, funny enough, to visit the weeder shop at Charing Cross. And I came across, I didn't know it was going to be there. I hadn't bothered paying any attention to the news, a CND rally, ban the bomb. And as I come up at the stairs, I looked in the newspapers afterwards. I'd never seen a crowd this big in my life. And it was 100,000 people. At that rally, a person died. And I actually looked this up, the kind of common sense stuff. Every time you get a crowd of 100,000 people together, one will die. That is the statistical norm. If they're there for long enough, some poor fucker will keel over and have a heart attack and die. That's just literally because there's 100,000 people standing together. It is just one person that day from 100,000 will die. Now, did they die because they went to Trafalgar Square for a CND rally? No, they didn't. They would have fucking died anyway. See how numbers can be played with. You could say, oh, banning the bomb kills you. No, that person would have died anyway. So I mean, it's ridiculous. So we can do that. We can make that claim. I went to a rally, someone fell over, died. Now, we have seen zero to date in the 10, 15, maybe longer years of people using GW. And I'm not going to argue at any amount because we haven't seen an amount quoted, because we haven't seen someone died. But for the time, let's just say it's at the 20 milligrams a day. We have seen zero evidence, not clickbait, no claims, no stupid newspapers that would talk about aliens landing on the moon. I saw the Queen driving a bus and she was upside down in a submarine. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Not
I just
one of
want to
those.
say, yeah, sorry, I just want to say one thing, Mom, because we're running out of time. Look, the hypocrisy is what bothers me. Because look, if you don't want to use GW, don't use GW. No one's forcing you to use GW. But don't be a hypocrite. Don't be a hypocrite because in your
cut your
house,
fucking fat out. Just eat better. Do more.
yeah. But here's the thing, like talking about cancer, everybody out there who bashes, GW,
Yes.
oh, it causes cancer. Look under your sink. You've got carcinogenic things. You've got pesticides. You've got herbicides. You've got Clorox and other things that destroy millions of brain cells.
First aid cabinet. Your
All
first
that
aid
stuff,
cabinet, your pills, your prescription medication.
the water that you drink contains
Yes.
carcinogens. If you're
The
not filtering
fumes
your
that
water,
come out of the back of your fucking car.
yes.
The smoke you breathe in when you have a barbecue.
Yep. And then even like charring, your meat. We talked about it on that causes. So, don't be like, oh, I'm not gonna do that. That drives me crazy in a lot of cases. It's very weird that some people are like that. Or like, this is funny, people who vape or they smoke cigarettes and then they're against legalizing pot. How does that make any sense? Pot is actually, I'm not saying pot is safe or anything, but pot is safer than vaping or smoking cigarettes. But then you're against pot. Why? Because then you're
Steve, why are they
brainwashed.
arguing against something that's actually going to benefit them and help them get into shape? And yet they're almost arguing against it. I'd like to get into shape. I want to be leaner. I want to trim my waist. I want to feel healthy. I want to be able to do cardio, but I'm worried. Motherfucker, don't leave the house. Spit your tinfoil hat on and go to your bunker. If you start thinking like that, but look, right? Weightlifting is one of the safest activities you can do. You might get a strain or an injury, but the number of people that die from a barbell or a dumbbell is very, very. You've got more chance of me hitting you with one and died than you have an accident that will kill you. Do people die from weights dropping on their neck and on their chest? Absolutely. How many of those die that particular weight? It's probably like 2 or 3 a year. Maybe in America.
Yeah. I've actually dealt with that as a weightlifting coach. Parents wouldn't let their kids weightlifting coach. I'd tell the kids, look, I want you on the weightlifting team. You're very talented. You're very strong. Like, no, my parents don't want me weightlifting. It's too dangerous. But their parents will let them play hockey or let them play football or let them play soccer.
Hit the head with a baseball.
You get more injuries.
Broken necks in American football.
There's a kid I knew when I was in school. He got paralyzed playing soccer. He ran into another kid. It was a fluke thing, and he actually got paralyzed right there on the soccer field.
We've had two soccer players in this country in the last 10 years. One died honestly, we had the same thing in America, where you had a young American pro ball athlete died on the field in front of people. People were crying in the stands. We've had two in this country in the last 20 years. One arguably maybe had heart effects because they said these athletes were still playing football when the whole fucking COVID came around, and maybe that was the issue. The other issue, of course, is the fact they're athletes, they're young, they can have large hearts, and so on and so forth. The reality situation is them dying on the field in front of people is scary as fuck. A young athlete is supposed to be in amazing condition, and he's dropped down dead literally in front of you while you're enjoying the game. It is scary as fuck. So I get it. I understand it. But the reality of the situation is people are actually arguing about something that benefits them, gets them into shape, and arguably in some of these studies was actually proven to be, as you said already, Steve, anti-inflammatory. So I, by all means, come on and question it. But please, 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 if you do it, provide us with the evidence, update us. In fact, we say this at the end of the show, Steve, so I'll do it now. One of the things we said, if you dispute what we said, if you disagree with what you said, if our understanding of what we said in the study was wrong, please inform us, because it will only benefit us and it will only benefit our listeners. By all means, post us comments on YouTube, certainly come onto the forum. You can argue the point over one point. You don't even have to argue the whole point. But the bottom line is thus, and I said this already. We get it, we understand it, but your need and desire to get fit and get in shape should be the number one thing. And if that requires you to get off your ass and go out and do cardio, to get off your ass and eat better food from the supermarket or eat more organically, etc. It needs you to go outside in the fresh air in the sunshine instead of sitting indoors and all of these things. And that's on you to come up with an excuse or reason, skewed or otherwise, logically, against something that might actually benefit you doesn't make any sense to me. And then when we sit down and actually discuss what you discussed, what you brought up, and you said arguably is scary and it might be a risk, etc., we see the risk is so small as to be non-existent. And I say non-existent because of what I said earlier on. There is, to date, no single person that can argue that they know that someone died because they used GW. That hasn't happened. Not a single troll, not one. And we have to deal with trolls from time to time, Steve, as you know. Not a single troll, not even someone that wants a clickbait title for YouTube or for Instagram or for Twitter or whatever else is recommending stupid dosages of Cardarine. We've seen stupid dosages of DMP. We know how fucking lethal that is. Right? So we haven't seen that. We haven't even seen crappy media, and I'm talking about National Enquirer type papers, Daily Star in this country, the Sport as it used to be called, or whatever the hell. Not one of them. I think one of them had a Lancaster bomber on the moon. Not one of those comic-y type papers has made a claim like this, where GW or Cardarine has caused cancer, and here's Joe Bloggs that died, and his wife says this is what he was using, and so on and so forth. And even that's disassociated because it might ignore other aspects of their lifestyle, etc., what they're doing. Not one. I can't think of anything else, Steve, because honestly, again, if someone wants to introduce an aspect that we've missed or other studies that will prove positives and minuses, we're happy to discuss those. We're happy to go over those with people. Certainly bring them onto the forum and highlight parts of that we'd be interested in. What do you think on that, Steve, before we finish?
Yeah, you summed it up, buddy. So at the end of the day, look, there's a bunch of SARMs. GW is not a SARM, but there's a bunch of SARMs. You can actually go on Wikipedia and there's a list. And some of them are in phase 2, some of them are phase 3, some of them have discontinued. And at the end of the day, not a single one has been FDA approved yet. So at the end of the day, these are pretty new. These are pretty new products. So we'll have to see which ones get approved, which ones don't. But at the end of the day, just because a drug isn't approved doesn't mean it can't be used in bodybuilding. It doesn't mean it doesn't have benefits.
Yeah, let me touch on that as we finish, Steve. I mean, here's the thing, guys, and we've actually discussed this as well. So, and I believe Cardarine actually, funny enough, falls into that particular trap. So they go, oh, they've stopped studying it, and they've gone. I said, look, the reason for a medication being introduced to the market is sometimes thus that there will be several items on the table, several medications on the table, which are all very, very similar. And the actual medical condition that existed that this medication was meant to treat is better treated by a second or third option. It doesn't mean necessarily that the first option, in this case, Cardarine, was ineffective. It just meant that something else that was specifically designed to treat a medical condition was found to be more effective, better supported, less issues, could be given to a much greater range of patients, and so on and so forth. So, for example, there are some amazing drugs out there to treat cancer, and then there's some others which are in chemotherapy, which are horrendous for side effects. You feel worse on some of those medications than you do on the actual medical condition that you're suffering with. But fingers crossed you survive, and at the end you come out feeling a lot better. Obviously, the alternatives are tested and looked at all the time. That's the case with, it's the same, we said about the stuff under the sink in the kitchen that can kill you in your medicine cabinet. It's the same thing with products. Cornflakes, jars of jam, they're constantly looking to upgrade and improve the formula. This happens with medications, but specifically to treat a medical condition. And if another option was quicker to get approved, or even just quicker to get to market, Steve, then that's the way that it goes. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.